Madam President, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the partial government shutdown, which is happening, and more importantly, related to this, the men and women of the United States Coast Guard who are working today, like every other member of the military, risking their lives here in my state, in Alaska, overseas, in the Middle East, and are not getting paid to do so. The only branch of the U.S. military not getting paid to risk their lives for their country in the U.S. military. They missed their first paycheck today. But, Madam President, here's the good news. We're offering a solution that's working through the federal government that has a lot of potential. And before I get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the partial government shutdown itself. Make clear that I believe the Trump administration's efforts to secure the border should be part of the solution. Every nation has the right, has the responsibility to protect its citizens, protect its sovereignty, and in my view, this is something that should not be controversial. Every nation has the right, responsibility to do this, and that's what the citizens of each country expect. Should not be controversial. In fact, over the past 25 years, every single president of the United States, Democrat, Republican, has attempted to secure our southern border, has come before the Congress and said, I'm going to secure the southern border, has campaigned on securing the southern border. They've all said this, and even the members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, year after year, have come to the floor, both houses, and said, we need to do it. Just in 2014, President Obama, in a big speech, called the situation on the southern border a crisis. It was 4 years ago, a crisis. Previous president, President Obama, I agree with his assessment then, and I agree with President Trump's assessment now, which is the same assessment. That's why the president's asking for $5.7 billion to secure our border is not an unreasonable request, particularly as many members of this body just last spring, when we were debating immigration reform, voted for dollar amounts that were much greater than that. Again, Democrats, Republicans, last spring, debating on the floor of this body, immigration reform, border security, way north of $5.7 billion. So this is just one of the many solutions we need to grapple with in order to have a functional immigration system that secures our border, enforces the law, helps grow our economy, and importantly, keeps families together. But securing the border is an important goal. So I'm hoping, as we all work on this, that Speaker Pelosi, Minority Leader Schumer, the President, my Republican colleagues, that we can get to a compromise on this issue soon. We all need to come together. And the good news, as I mentioned, Madam President, is that we might be on the verge of coming together, those parties that I just mentioned, on one of the issues that relate to securing our border, that relate to this broader challenge on the partial government shutdown involving the United States Coast Guard. And I'm hopeful this could be a template for getting out of the broader partial government shutdown. Madam President, as you know, the partial government shutdown is negatively impacting federal workers, but none more so than the brave men and women of the U.S. Coast Guard. They are currently the only members of the U.S. military, as I mentioned, who are not getting paid during this partial government shutdown. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines are all out there risking their lives for our nation. We greatly appreciate that. And guess what? They're getting paid to do it, as they should be. But the Coast Guard members are also out there risking their lives. Especially in my state, the great state of Alaska. They're out in the Bering Sea, some of the roughest, most dangerous oceans in the world, keeping our fishermen safe, rescues. They're deployed overseas. They're deployed in the Middle East. They've been in Florida, Texas, helping with natural disasters, hurricanes, all heroic service. And, Madam President, there's been many shutdowns before in the federal government, unfortunately, dating back decades. But this might be the first time ever that you have every branch of the military being paid during the shutdown with the exception of one. So let me read a letter today from the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Carl Schultz, to the men and women of the Coast Guard. It starts with this paragraph. To the men and women of the United States Coast Guard, today you will not be receiving your regularly scheduled mid-month paycheck. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time in our nation's history that service members in a U.S. armed force have not been paid during a lapse in government appropriations. That's the first paragraph in the Commandant's letter to all the members of the United States Coast Guard. First time in U.S. history that we're doing this to members of the military. And Madam President, I'd like to insert the rest of this letter for the record.
Without objection.
So nobody thinks this is a good idea. Nobody thinks this is a good idea. So last week, a number of us in this body, Democrats and Republicans, put forward a bill that says simply we should pay the Coast Guard, the men and women of the Coast Guard, even if we're in a partial government shutdown, just like we're paying the men and women of the other branches of the military. They're risking their lives daily. They can't just quit their job. By the way, if they just want to go quit, they're going to be court-martialed. So that's a little different from other federal service. So that's what we said we were going to do. When the president came to the Senate last week, I had the opportunity to raise this issue with the president and his team and highlighted the fact that this is very, very different. We need to work together. We have a bill. If we can get the president's support on it, signature on it, that would be a good way to move it forward. And I've been in communication with his administration ever since the lunch, working with us. Well, Madam President, I'm hopeful that we're on the verge of a breakthrough because the White House has said that the president recognizes this is a rather unique situation, very unique. So he has now said he's going to support this bill. So again, we have Democrats, Republicans, the White House, the President of the United States, all saying, all right, we're not there yet, but this is a good start, and this is an important issue. So what's going on right now in this body, Madam President, is we're trying to UC this, get unanimous consent from Democrats and Republicans on this bill. Again, leadership on the Democratic side, on the Republican side, have all supported this bill, pay the Coast Guard like the other military service members. The White House is now supportive. So hopefully tonight, we're going to get this cleared. We're going to get it over to the House. Speaker Pelosi and her team will recognize how dire and important this is, just like Democrats and Republicans and the President. And Secretary Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, all recognize this, and we get to a solution. It's not going to end everything, but it'll be a solution. So I'm asking my colleagues tonight, as this bill is being moved through the hotline for unanimous consent, I think all the Republicans have already said they would support it. We get my colleagues on the Democratic side. Again, there's a number of Democratic co-sponsors on this bill. The president said he would sign it, get it over to the House, and we start to get solutions as opposed to just roadblocks. So, Madam President, just two broader issues I want to raise here. As I'm indicating, this kind of work can be a template to getting to a broader solution with regard to the partial government shutdown. Democrats, Republicans in this body working together, the White House working with us, the Trump administration working with us, and hopefully the House will see the wisdom of this when the bill comes over to them, and we get a bill signed that takes care of almost 50,000 active duty patriots, men and women, risking their lives right now as we speak with no pay. So, I'm hopeful that's a template. Another broader issue, though, Madam President, that this matter actually raises, that we need to focus on a lot more here in the Senate, is a problem that I've seen in the last 4 years during my time here, is that sometimes the Coast Guard gets short shrift relative to other members of the military. It's wrong, and we need to work on it together. Why has that happened? Well, certainly not because they're not as heroic and dedicated and patriotic as the rest of the military. And I don't think it's intentional. It's more bureaucratic. The Coast Guard falls under the Commerce Committee. The Coast Guard falls under the Homeland Security Secretary. The Marines, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force are under the Armed Services Committee, under the Pentagon. And sometimes things just happen, whether it's retirement pay, whether it's this example of paying the military, where the Coast Guard gets treated in an unequal manner. They shouldn't. They shouldn't. We need to treat all members of the military, all 5 branches, the same. Pay, retirement, shutdowns, and again, I think it's not intentional, but it does happen. So, Madam President, I'm the chairman of the subcommittee in the Commerce Committee in charge of the Coast Guard, sit on the Armed Services Committee, and I want to work with, I know a lot of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, have recognized this as a problem. The chairman of the Commerce Committee, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee have. I think we're all focused, again, bipartisan, to address some of these challenges where the Coast Guard is not treated equally among the other services, and that's just wrong. So we need to start working on that. I'm going to continue to focus on that issue. But the best way we can start working on that is tonight. Fix this pay problem, which every single American knows is inequitable, knows is not fair to the men and women of the Coast Guard, but we're on the verge of a solution. Let's see this bill tonight. We have the White House's support. Get it over to the House, and at least we'll take care of one issue where there's an inequality between the men and women in the other branches of the service and the Coast Guard, and it will work to fix all the others. But I'm hopeful that we're going to get there tonight, and hopefully we'll solve this problem in the next 24 to 48 hours. I yield the floor.